Welcome back to the Female Property Expert podcast. This week, we're joined by Jamie Clutterbuck, who is the founder of Bucks Property Services. Now, he brings a wealth of experience in the estate agency industry. He has a background working for one of the largest sales agents in the UK, and he tends to specialise in new homes. Jamie has honed his skills and expertise in navigating the ever-changing property landscape, and now as the driving force behind his own agency. So Jamie is here to kind of share valuable insights and advice for both buyers and sellers alike. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the world of property with Jamie. Welcome, Jamie. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
Thank you for joining us today.
No problem.
So I mentioned in the sort of intro part that you've worked with one of the largest sales agents in the UK. But what inspired you to then branch out and start your own agency?
I think it was for lots of reasons, really. The main reason is kind of behind lifestyle and how I wanted to try and have a bit more time with my children and just, have a better way of life, really. I think, and also make more money. Working for an estate agent, you kind of have a ceiling. So I was a regional director for LSL New Homes, covering Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, and Oxfordshire. But there's a definite ceiling in how much you can earn in that kind of a role. And I think working for myself, have my own company, gives me the opportunity to do things a bit differently, but also have a better way of life. And ultimately, that's where the decision came from.
Absolutely. Kind of creating your own freedom to give yourself more time back. I understand.
Yeah, exactly. I think on top of that, I found that, and I'm not saying I'm the best estate agent in the world, but I found that relying on less experienced staff to sell for you in a corporate setting is difficult. And I think being able to do things how I want to do them and create the relationships that I want to create really is where I want to be. I see it as being a service industry, and I think sometimes the service in a corporate agency isn't quite there.
Yeah, it's lacking somewhat.
Yeah, I think so. Not every agent, I wouldn't want to slate every agency, but sometimes I think it can be lacking and it doesn't give the customers what they need.
Yeah. I've worked with various different agencies and I understand what you mean. So, for the listeners who've tuned in today, can you explain exactly what the role of an estate agent is? Because I often hear, especially new people coming into the industry, saying things like, oh, they're charging a fortune, they've just advertised on Rightmove. And you're like, well, they do a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at what an estate agent can give you, most of them will give you the same basics. So they'll all give you Rightmove, most will give you Zoopla, most of them will give you a database of people that are potentially looking to buy or sell. But I think it's changing a little bit in so much that the model is definitely changing into a self-employed model. So there's lots of agents turning to self-employed model rather than working for an agency. And I think for me, I suppose to answer your question, my take on what an estate agent should give you then would be almost a partner, someone that you can rely on, someone that you can go to for advice, someone that you can go to and should be able to answer your questions sensibly and build a partnership with them. So if you're a buyer, then they should be able to listen to what you need and potentially have properties that aren't yet on the market that they can point you towards. And it's just about creating that relationship for me.
Yeah.
I think it should be someone that you can rely on, can talk to, can seek advice from, and all those things that you'd expect a proper service to give you. They shouldn't just be, I mean, a few years ago, your estate agency was easy. You just property online and it would sell. Today, it's not quite as easy as that. And I think it relies on those relationships, both with you as a buyer or seller, and also with the seller on the other side. You need to understand both sides of the coin now. It's a little bit more difficult than it was.
And in the interest of transparency, you've sold a couple of properties for us. And
Yeah.
again, that's what's kept the relationship open between us as a business and you as a business because of that additional support. It might be, oh, I'm not in the local area. I know it's a bit cheeky, but would you mind just popping some keys up? And well, do you know what? I'm going up there anyway. I've got to go to a different viewing, so I can drop them in a bit earlier. It's that I think builds a relationship, as well as, being able to ask those questions and get that support, especially for investors, because they're not always based in the area that they're working in. So having an agent who's willing to sort of do a little bit more than what they would do normally, if it's not too far out of their way, always helps.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's so my background, as you mentioned, is predominantly in new home sales, and I think that's even more important because the relationship can last a lot longer. So I would hope that the next time you build a development that you're going to sell, you might you might point it in my direction. And that's how the world goes round, right? I think my business is always built around building those relationships. And so when ex developer goes and builds something else, the first person they come back to is me and my business. And that's really where, over the years, where we've won. I mean, we built successful new homes business in my last job that we had an 80-90% market share in our area. And it got to the point where we didn't really need to do a lot to generate business. Developers would just come directly to us because they knew that if they wanted to sell a new home, we're probably the only ones likely to be able to do it. And that's really where the relationships, thrive, I guess.
Yeah, that's why we came to you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I suppose over the years you've noticed some changes, but what are the notable shifts that you've seen in buyers' preferences, or maybe their behaviour, should I say, that you've observed when going through the sales process?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift to the market has been the taking away, if you like, of the Help to Buy scheme. That's had a huge impact on sales rates, really. And I think when we launched your last site, we had Help to Buy, and quite a few of the buyers
Yeah.
used Help to Buy. I think I would say that we were selling, in the peak of things, we were selling 12 to 15 new homes every month. And I would say that 10 of those were utilizing Help to Buy every month. So as soon as that died, that took with it a significant chunk of first time buyers. So I think from a buyer demographic, that's been the big change for me in the last 3-4 years, that the emergence of Help to Buy and then the taking away of Help to Buy. And I think we all hoped that the government would bring something back along those lines a couple of weeks ago in the budget, but that wasn't forthcoming. And I think that we were in the industry all expecting a sudden something to come along and help, whether it be 99% mortgages, which we talked about, or the Help to Buy scheme coming back. And in the end, nothing came, or very little came. And I think we're probably going to see the effects of that through the rest of this year. I think that the market will not struggle, but I don't think it's going to take off like it could have done if the government would have done something to help.
Yeah. Removing
You know,
incentives is definitely difficult, especially in the sort of more affluent areas where people can't afford to get on, the
yeah,
property ladder, basically. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, we've got a few shared ownership schemes in the area which do well, and I think even this year, in all honesty, that picked up this year since January. I think people are now kind of settled into the fact that the interest rates are where they are and they're not going to change anytime soon. And therefore, if someone needs to move, then they're going to need to move regardless of the interest rates, if that makes sense. And I think shared ownership definitely helps that. We see a lot of people who have only got a 5% deposit and they're looking to buy a flat. With shared ownership, they can, but with open market sales, they probably couldn't with only 5%. So yeah, we're seeing a bit of that. I suppose in terms of behaviours, I think COVID had an effect on what people are looking for in properties. I think outside space is important now.
yeah,
I think whether it's just a small balcony or a small terrace or something in a flat or garden in a house, that's important. And I think some home working space is also a trend that we're seeing people wanting. I mean, I know that everyone's talking about people returning to work, but it's not generally happening across the board yet. And if people have got somewhere to work from home, then that's a plus as well.
I think a lot of companies have realised that they can pretty much leave their workforce working from home. They're possibly a little bit more productive working from home,
Yeah.
and in turn, they don't have the costs that go with the big office buildings, the heating and the lighting, all the utilities. And so they've become quite wise to that. So we've definitely seen an uptake in people saying, is there a study? Is there additional
Yeah.
work space that they can go in? Or they've gone into gardens, for instance, and said, oh, we could put a little outside office here where a shed would sit, for instance. So it's definitely something that I've seen a change in over the
Yeah.
last.
I mean, I think I've got a few hats that I put on through the week, and two other of those. One of those is in recruitment in property, so recruiting, headhunting people into jobs in the property industry, and certain sectors of that. The workers are almost demanding to be able to work from home now, which is a definite shift in what we've seen over the last few years. Property managers, that kind of thing, if they don't need to be in the office, they're pretty much demanding that it's at least a hybrid role, if not a working from home role. And I think that's definitely changing. On the flip side of that, I'm also involved in a company that do outside offices, garden rooms, that kind of thing. And that industry in the last few years has gone crazy again since COVID, really.
Yeah.
Just gone through the roof. I mean, you're seeing some huge garden offices going up at the, over 100 grand at the go. And that's certainly a trend that we're seeing more of now, whether it be music studios or office space or whatever. But I think probably ties into interest rates going up as well. People are tending not to move if they need more space and they've got space in the garden. They're probably looking at that option rather than moving. Obviously, you're going to save some stamp duty. You're going to, all those things are factors behind what we're seeing in the property market as well.
Yeah, I agree. So if clients were to come to you, how do you advise them on the pricing of their properties? So to make them attractive to potential buyers, but also maximizing, their return on their investment that they've made. So how do you work that?
So I think in terms of advising pricing, and new developers are normally the worst for this, because it's a less, well, I'd say that. I mean, I was about to say it's a less emotional choice in terms of the pricing and more factual if you're a developer, but that's not always the case. I think when you're advising people, whether it be someone selling their house or a developer, you have to base it on the facts, and there's lots of ways of nowadays showing the facts and what that price should be. I use a software called Land Insight, which helps with my finding plots of land, but also helps me with comparables. And I think you can pull off within a certain radius exactly what's sold in the last X amount of months, exactly what price and exactly what square footage. So that's important, firstly, to get proper stats on what's sold in the area. I think you also need to know the area. So if someone came to me and said, I've got a new build development going up in this area, which will be ready in 12 months, I could probably give you a pound per square foot price immediately. If you said to me, can you price one in Edinburgh, then I'd be lost until I looked at the stats. So I think using a local agent with local knowledge will help, but it has to be, for me, based around fact. And I think, one of the criticisms of an estate agent is that they'll overprice things in order to win the instruction and then slowly backpedal when it doesn't sell. So there is a fine line, especially when working developers. They need to achieve as much as they can achieve, but it still needs to be sensible.
Yeah, I think there is that belief that land agents especially overprice land, and I see it regularly. In fact, all over the country, I see it, where they've gone out and they've said to said landowner, this land, if it got planning, would be worth, and you're like, but it hasn't got planning. It's just dead grazing land. There's no planning on it. Risk comes to the investor who's buying it. And I think there's a lot of, you're slightly different in this because I think you understand the developer role and what we do our side. But I think there's a lot of agents who don't necessarily understand that role, or they have inexperienced staff who don't.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think if you ever see a piece of land on Rightmove, it's probably overpriced, which is why it's on Rightmove. And you can normally see, if you scroll down and have a look at which agent's selling it and which agents put it on Rightmove, you normally get an idea of why it's overpriced. So I think, I mean, as you said, my background's in new home sales, and we're obviously closely linked to land sales as a part of that. However, I wouldn't claim to be a land expert in any shape or form. I think it's a whole new thing. It's a whole new game. It's something that you need an expert to look at. And I think if an agent tries to do it, they still work on the third, which nowadays doesn't work. And for me, even with a few years experience, I would always tend to pass people over to one of my land experts, in effect, rather than trying to bumble through it myself, unless it's obvious. But You need to understand all sorts of things, how much the build's going to cost, what the planning's going to cost,
Yeah.
the Section 106 is, the seal payment, everything like that. And unless you're an expert, I think it's a minefield that I'd want to steer away from, really.
And that's it. I mean, as a developer, we've been in positions where we've supplied the entire costing, like our breakdown spreadsheet that we would have. We've supplied that to agents to say, this is the reality. That's building at cost. This is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And they've still come back and gone, no, but it's worth £230,000 extra. And you're like, but it's not, because no one can build at that price. You might want to pick that figure out of the air, but no one can actually build at that price.
No, exactly. And that's why, I've got a piece of land which a developer bought, actually, and has decided he doesn't want to build it himself. And the price he's asking is at least 30% above where it should be. And he won't sell it for any less. And you think, well, no one's going to buy it. If someone buys this, it's just going to go wrong. So, it's a difficult one. Land for me is, I've got a guy that I work with, Nick, who, if I get anything, whatever size, I'll pass it straight to Nick and he can look at it for me. I think it's something that's difficult to get into.
Absolutely. So how do you stay informed in kind of market conditions or regulation changes and, other factors that impact property sales? Is there something you go to or somewhere you read this information from?
Yeah, I tend to. I think the world of the podcast is definitely evolving. I think that there are some good property podcasts out there, this one included, obviously.
Thanks.
And I use LinkedIn a lot. I have to use LinkedIn for the recruitment side. So if you ever sort out my LinkedIn profile, it's all about the recruitment, because that's what I need LinkedIn for. But, I've got 6,000 connections on there that are all property people, and most of what I read comes from there. I'm also a member of a networking group. I don't know if I can mention that, can I? Or,
Yeah.
so a group based out of Gerrards Cross called the Titans Property Group. There's about 100 people who are members of that, and that's very good. So they have 3 or 4 people each meeting once a month to talk about different subjects. The room's normally filled with either investors or brokers or architects or developers or things like that. So that's always a good, useful tool for me. But most of the stuff I would say comes from LinkedIn and my connections on there.
Yeah. And I think that's quite a good point to raise, because there are a lot of sort of networking events out there where you can learn from. A lot of them are, I think they're crap, because they're just full of people trying to sell to you. But there are some very good ones. If you get in to some very good ones where you actually learn, the education from the speaker is really good.
Exactly, yeah. And I think my background, as you know, isn't in estate agency as such. So I'm fairly new to the estate agency world. I mean, when I say fairly new, 6 or 7 or 8 years now, I guess. But for me, the notion of selling a house isn't rocket science. It's just relationship building and being honest and reliable, I guess. If you asked me to go and run a lettings office tomorrow, I wouldn't have a clue. Wouldn't have any clue about anything to do with lettings at all, because I've never needed it. So, it's learning's important. And as I say, most of my learnings have come from my connections on LinkedIn, really.
Yeah. So finally, before we take up too much of your time, what do you see kind of the future outlook of the property market in the UK? Is there anything you anticipate is going to evolve over the next coming months or years?
Months, no. I think the market is improving. So Rightmove have released a report this week to say that prices are 1.5% up month on month, which would tend to mean that we've reached the bottom of the curve.
Yeah.
So I think we will see a pickup. I don't think we'll see anything like we would have done 3 or 4 years ago, but I would expect house prices to rise, I don't know, 5% this year, something like that. However, I would caveat that by saying that with the election around the corner, at some point this year at least, I think buyers will be a little bit quiet in coming forward. I think everyone's going to wait and see what happens a little bit with that. There's a chance that Conservatives could have one last hurrah in the autumn to try and help us out a bit, but we'll see. I think if Labour come in, then they're talking about opening up more building opportunities, possibly in Greenbelt as well. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting, but I don't think the market's going to do a great deal in the next 12 months. I think it's going to stay fairly flat. I think interest rates, again, I think they might fall a little bit in the summer, but we may be talking 0.5%. So yeah, I think this year we just need to buckle up and things will stay pretty much as they are today, I would say.
Yeah.
In the long term, who knows? I think I think we all probably think that the Labour government are going to be coming into play, and what that brings, I don't think any of us really know. I think from a landlord point of view, it could be tough. As investors, I think that we're likely to be hit a bit more under a Labour government potentially, without wanting to get too political. But yeah, I can't see a great deal happening in the next 12 months. Longer term, who knows? Who knows? We could have another COVID next year, couldn't we? I think
Hopefully
everyone's
not, but
beyond
actually, I quite enjoyed
beyond
COVID.
getting, aren't they now?
Yeah, I quite
Yeah,
enjoyed
I
COVID,
think
but I don't think a lot of the country did.
no, I think it's there's no point in guessing, is there? Really,
No.
we'll sit tight and see what happens. I think ultimately, I think investing in property is never going to be a bad move, is it? And whatever's happening in the political world or globally, I think investing in bricks and mortar is still the way to go.
Yeah, it's still the second highest revenue generator, and it's still the second securest way of building wealth in the UK, especially. But there's so many different strategies people can do out. And people often say to me, when's the right time to buy? And once you understand the property cycle, a cycle that property goes through, once you understand that cycle, you very quickly know when to get in, get out, hold, and move round. And it's over a
Yeah,
period of years. It's not, it's not like a 3-year cycle, it's an 18-year cycle, but it's very interesting. And I think a lot of people that get into investment don't understand that cycle. So they buy at the wrong time, or, they freak out because, interest rates are really high and they can't afford to do things anymore. And those that are a little bit more savvy understand that regardless of the interest rates, there are still good opportunities out there. You just need to wait, be patient, and find the right ones.
yeah,
Uh,
I agree. Yeah,
so anyway, that's a wrap for today's episode with Jamie Clutterbuck from Bucks Property Services. We got quite a lot of ground covered, from
we
understanding
did.
buyers' preferences, didn't we, to navigating, I suppose, different, the lending process, that what might happen in the future, and everything in between. Jamie, thank you so much for sharing
Thank
your
you.
expertise and insight with me today, or with us today. To our listeners, remember to stay informed. Obviously, stay proactive is the other thing I would suggest. And stay tuned to us for more valuable content and property investment detail. Until next time, happy investing.